Hi there, Matt Dixon here with Purple Patch Fitness, and welcome to a new little test of some conversations that we're going to be having with some people over the coming weeks in collaboration with Triathlete magazine. And today I'm joined by a very wonky guest, Tim DeBoom, who's looking sideways on my screen right now.
You're looking neat.
But that's all good. We can hold the conversation as it stands. And for you guys that don't know Tim, you should. He's a undoubted legend of the sport, two-time Ironman Hawaii champion, as well as two-time podium finisher in the race, and the last American to actually win the race. And that's apropos for today's discussion that Tim and I are going to have, because we want to focus on the next Ironman winner that can come from the United States. And Tim recently did an article for Triathlete magazine with Ben Hoffman, Andy Potts, and Liz Lyles, if I'm right, discussing really the merits of really trying to come into Hawaii fresh. And we have this discussion, Tim, with obviously the Ironman 70.3 World Championships happening this weekend in Austria, and only a few weeks before the Hawaii Ironman, and I think that you feel like that's a real hindrance on athletes that are sort of solely focused for the Hawaii Ironman. So let's dive straight in and start discussing. And why don't you give your sort of point of view on what you feel like it takes to win Hawaii, and some of the influences.
Well, I honestly think to win Hawaii, you have to focus on Hawaii all year, and even prior to that. And I don't particularly think, there's not a problem with racing, but I think there's not a lot of respect right now for that 70.3 distance and what it does to your body leading up to an Ironman. I think there's been some anomalies along the way who can pull it off. I mean, like a Crowe or something like that who can race. But, honestly, I think exponentially that stuff adds up and will hinder you. Even if it's not this year, it'll hinder you down the road in the next year. But I honestly don't think you can train for 70.3 Worlds and Kona because they're so close together and be at your peak for both of them. I think the training is so different for both of them now that to try and pull that off is asking a lot of an athlete, and it's very rarely been pulled off.
I agree, and I certainly agree in concept, and in fact, the last two Americans after you that did well in Hawaii, or at least a bit of top finish, were obviously Ben Hoffman last year, which I thought was a wonderful performance that Ben put in, and Chris Lieto before that, and I actually coached Chris, so I certainly agree with the absolute need to come in really fresh. Do you think that it is the same for female and male athletes?
Females are a bit different because they have less muscle mass, so they do recover better, and I think that's been proven a little bit throughout the years with some certain athletes. But I still think, you look at someone like Rinny, who, she gets to Kona, and that's her focus for the year. You don't see much of her throughout the year except for at Kona. Last year she had a great race at Rote, but she's skipping 70.3 Worlds this year simply because she doesn't think it fits. And I think a lot of that is travel related, like traveling to Europe for her is a stress. But women definitely, I think, recover quicker than men.
Mm-hmm. Do you think as well that someone like Rinny, and I don't know Rinny very well, I know Siri, her coach, well, but do you think that someone like Rinny as well will look at a 70.3 in Austria with that type of course and just think, what's the net gain? I don't think I can actually potentially win a race like that with the way that course is set up. And as you said, the way the racing has changed, there's a big differential with Rinny's weaker swim in 70.3 racing. I think it becomes harder and harder for an athlete like her to go and win a half Ironman World Championship, and that's with full credit to what a wonderful athlete that she is. But do you think it's solely just about her Ironman prep, or do you think it might be a little bit of like a strategic thing of saying, why sort of risk that?
Well, I think it's strategic as well, for sure. She doesn't stand a chance of winning that 70.3 Worlds. She hasn't performed at the 70.3 level, like on a championship level, for a long time, or if really, because her swim and bike just are not not there. It's her run that wins her these world championships, and I think everybody would agree with that. It's she's got a serious weapon in her run, and it just doesn't come into play quick enough on a 70.3 course.
I think you mentioned something earlier as well around the way that these two races are going, and I think that even when you raced, and bizarrely we raced against each other a few times, but you'll never remember that. I was leading on the swim, I'll promise you that, but after that I just waved goodbye. But even since sort of you were racing, I think that the sport has really undergone a sort of a divergence of how the races are being raced, and sort of if we go male and female, half Ironman racing now is very, very different than it used to be even. I mean, the intensity that these guys and the variance of intensity that these guys are riding at is a world apart from what it used to be even when you were racing, which would support your point, I think.
No, absolutely. It's completely changed. Bringing more of the short course guys up, and it's raced like an Olympic distance race now. I mean, it's all out, and that's why I think the difference between 70.3 and Ironman is so drastic. It used to be able to carry over. I mean, guys like me would win Wildflower and win Kona, and Wildflower is a different kind of race just because it's a strongman's race. And I think Ironman is definitely more about strength than speed, unless you're looking at one of these blazing courses like Frankfurt or Road or something like that. But for the most part, I think the 70.3 distance is translating better to the Olympic distance than it is to the Ironman distance these days.
Yeah, I agree. One of the components, and without being argumentative, because in concept I absolutely agree with the need to show up to Kona sort of, as I would say, actually fit and fresh, and that was my big mission with Chris. Actually, I felt like Chris Lieto over-raced and in fact overtrained sometimes. While the demands are obviously massive and the training needs to be big, I always felt like he showed up to Hawaii fatigued. And that was my big mission with him when I sort of in 2009, and in fact in 2010 when I felt like he was even better prepared than 2009, is to get him there fresh. But I do think that there are different types of athletes as well, and for myself as a coach, I train thoroughbreds. I train men and women that really need to be very, very careful with load and racing. People like Jesse Thomas, for an example, and he's not a Hawaii Ironman athlete, but someone like him where you have to be very, very careful with race load. At the same time, I race athletes that are extremely resilient and in fact almost feed on racing and training. Someone like a Meredith Kessler that I've never met anyone more resilient. And for me, when I look at sort of preparation for racing in general and then racing in Hawaii, it's as much for me not just the race day, but also the training and the way that you're setting up the training to get that athlete ready for Hawaii that can have an impact. And I also think that, I think that there's really 2 points. The first being, there is an option, I believe, for some athletes to be able to race a little bit more frequently and be able to go and do something like an Austria and still have a strong Hawaii Ironman performance. And at the second time, in order for that to happen, though, you have to adjust their training to make sure that they truly recover, which takes a lot of courage for the athlete and the coach.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree that you can do races. There are certain athletes that can do that. But the point I'm trying to make is it's exponential over the course of a season. You can't race as much as these guys are racing over the course of a season and expect to perform at the end of the season if you've done 7 or 8 70.3s and an Ironman in there prior to Kona. You're not going to be at your best. It's just not. It's not possible. But in Austria, as long as your racing is limited around that, then you could go into Kona as look at Kienle last year. He raced very limitedly, but he pulled off a great Frankfurt and an incredible Kona, and that's how you do it. And I see, Frodeno is going to be interesting this year to see, because he's doing 70.3 worlds, and he's probably he's definitely trying to win it. And it'll be interesting to see if his focus is on Kona or more on that, and how he's recovered from a very hot, hard Frankfurt. I've got to believe that takes something out of him. And the positive thing for him is he has very limited racing. He's not out there racing every other weekend. I look at someone like Andy Potts, who does Coeur d'Alene, and he's already done 2 or 3 70.3s since then. And I have to believe that's just a mistake. He's a big guy, and his body is not going to recover fully, plus put in the training that he needs for Kona and the recovery he needs for Kona. So it's, I look at that, and I have to question it. I mean, that's where my feelings are for sure. And, I just watch some of these guys, the amount they travel and the amount they race. I'm amazed that they're still walking by the end of the season.
Well, the travel is the big, and as the sport has become more of a worldwide sport, people underestimate the impact of travel as well, and crossing time zones. I work with a bunch of executive guys, and it just destroys them.
Yep.
And that's another component that you have to sort of acknowledge as well in this big equation. And then there's sort of 2 other components as well, which is there's a shift in the way that qualification occurs, and that's having an impact. And second to that, there's also, I think it becomes harder and harder for athletes to, it is a big risk, an emotional risk, and I think that everyone has a varying amount of how much they can put their eggs in one basket, and it becomes both emotionally and practically challenging not to sort of build a career for yourself, but instead solely focus on the Hawaii Ironman as the race becomes more and more competitive from a depth standpoint, male and female. Would you agree with those 2 points?
I would, except that I think with an athlete who's shown that there's potential to possibly win Kona, someone who's been top 5 there, then what's the risk of saying, going to your sponsors or your whatever and saying, you know what, this year I am all in for Kona. I'm setting my season around that. I'm going to do an early Ironman, very limited racing, and show up in Kona as fresh and fast as I can. And to me, not taking that risk at least once or twice in your careers is a mistake. I mean, the sport had evolved enough that I was getting huge offers to go race in Roth or Frankfurt, and for me it was I wanted that world title in Kona. And the second time I was like I wanted to back it up, and I wanted to prove that it was a worthy victory. And I look at some of these guys that do treat it like a business, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of your career, you're going to look back and say, I wish I would have taken that 1 year, that one chance, and really thrown everything I've got and changed my schedule a little bit and done things, differently. Because I look at a lot of these guys doing things, and they just kind of do the same thing every year. They might change a race here or there, but they haven't fully just said, I'm gonna blow things up in my own little world here, do things completely different than I have, and look for a different result. Instead, they're doing kind of the same thing and looking for a different result. And that I've got, like, an example is Cam Whittoff from years and years ago, and he's got top 10 in Hawaii several times, but he did the same thing every year and saw the same results. And I was always like, why? I mean, when I didn't get the result I wanted, I changed things, and you work until you get that result you want. And that's the frustration I get sometimes watching some of these guys, because even with the qualification procedures, I do believe that you can set up your season, qualify, get it done early, and be fresh at the end of the season. And for men, I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. And look, in the last couple of years of Chris's season, it was absolutely like that. That was the big evolution, is you only have one more thing that you want to achieve, which is to win Kona. And therefore you have to tailor not just the first season, but for the rest of your career, whether it's 2 or 3 seasons, it all has to be based around that race with every decision. And in order for that to happen, you have to radically evolve your approach. And because you've been getting the same result every time, so it sort of echoes your point. And I think we have examples of people that have taken that risk and really achieved great stuff. Ben Bean last year, where I think he set up his season well. Luke McKenzie the year before. They both got second in Hawaii, but that result from them, actually probably from a financial standpoint, a confidence standpoint, and a support of sponsor standpoint, massively paid dividends relative to even if they had won 2 or 3 other Ironmen in the year. So if you take the risk once, it's like it catapults you to a new level of probably support and also emotional intelligence on it all.
Absolutely. I'm seeing it with Ben right now. He's in Boulder, and I see the change in him from years past, and it's a real positive, and he's putting that risk out there. Early in the year I was scolding him a little bit for us. I'd see him and I'd be like, "What are you doing racing so much?" And it was kind of, and since then he's kind of turned that back, and he's focused on the training, the recovery, and I think he's got another good one in him.
Yeah.
But in the same page, I watched, someone like Tim Burkle, who he's trying to get ready for Kona, and I see him race. One week he's in the Philippines, and then he's back here, and the next week he's off to Australia, and then he's headed to Kona. And I was like, where's the recovery and the training for Kona? And how do you expect, you're 7th in Kona last year, and I just don't get it. I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been interesting to watch. I mean, because I did kind of cross I was on the stage with Mark Allen in 10th place, and then on the stage with Crowe and Macca when the race had changed a little bit, and now I think it's going through another change with some of these short course guys showing up and bringing some new levels of talent, even though you're still, I think Kienle's a bit of an old school type racer. I mean, he brings it hard, and he just does his race, and he just goes to the front and goes. And I think Jan's he's showing to do the same thing, even coming from that ITU background. So in the women's race, it's nice that it's evolving because of the difference in the start. They're not dealing with the age group men as much, and so it's going to be a more fair race, and that puts someone like Rinny at risk. And
it does, and I still feel like the women's race has undergone, I think, a massive evolution in the last years, and it has become more tactical. And with that, these women are riding their bikes a lot harder. I still don't believe that we're near potential in women's racing. I think the guys can probably get another minute out of the swim potentially, but the bike ride is sort of the toughest thing in the bike ride is the variance that happens now with the tactical racing, something that Kienle obviously doesn't have to deal with too much because of his weapons. But the guys still have sort of an opening in the run, but the women still have another gulf. But it's exactly that. Because of that evolution, I think that to become, unless you have something that the sport hasn't seen before, a run like Rinny, you have to be a really balanced swimmer, biker, and runner to be able to come off and win that race in the future, for sure.
Yeah, I think it takes a complete athlete for sure, but I also believe that to win it now, you actually do need one of your 3 disciplines to be a weapon. I mean, you need to be strong in all 3. I mean, there's not a man who's going to come out of the swim 7, 8, 10 minutes down and win this thing ever.
No, ever. It's not going to happen.
Be 2-3 minutes back at the most, I think, at this point, and still have a chance. But you have to have a ride like Kienle, basically.
Yeah.
So it takes a very balanced athlete, and that, and the women's race as well. I mean, I think the other women are improving enough that if Rinny's 13, 14, 15 minutes down again, it's not going to happen like it did last year.
Yeah.
So it's fun to watch.
Well, it's terrifying if you're a coach, but it is fun to watch. Who do you think? I guess the last question, and maybe we'll just touch on age group racing just for a couple of minutes. But who do you think? When I sort of look ahead, and Ben has arrived now, who do you think are some of the guys and maybe the women that you think in the coming years can have the opportunity or the right to solely focus on Hawaii? And I'll lead it off because non-American. I look at someone like Tim Reed, who I obviously coached him, but I look at him and for me, he's just got future Hawaii all over him. He's got the mindset, he's got the intelligence, he's got the body type, and he's got the swim and certainly the bike and the run to really, I think, be great. And I look at the American racers, and I'm not sure who that is. I wonder whether you think who you see sort of coming up.
I honestly, I'm right there with you. I don't see anybody on the American scene. I think it's going to be somebody we haven't really tasted yet. It's I see the guys here in Boulder, and this is the crux of it. With a lot of guys, and I mean, I don't want to come across as old school, like we were tougher and stuff. But I watch these guys. They go out in groups of 5, 10 guys, 15 guys going on group rides and dawdle around out there, or they go out. I mean, the guys going out with the girls and riding, which I don't want to be chauvinistic or anything, but you're just not getting. I mean, it's great for the girls; they get great workouts out of that. But the guys, they're not getting what they need. And I mean, I tell guys all the time, like, are you doing any 5, 6, 7 hour rides by yourself? Because that's what it takes. I mean, that's where your mental toughness and your nutrition and that is what it takes. And I don't know one guy who's won that race who didn't go out and do that kind of stuff by himself at times. And it's hard for me to see that. And, there's a lot of soft guys out there and just don't want to put in the work. And things I've heard about Tim Reed, yeah, he's hungry, he's efficient, and he seems strong, which I think is more important than anything else. He's not fragile. There's just a lot of fragile guys out there, and they're just not as willing to put in the work.
And it also takes, you mentioned something just in there that's worthy of mention of going out. I think that if you're going out with your friends or your training partners, it's impossible to truly test in conditions or long duration type rides like that, your nutrition, fueling, and hydration that needs to be programmed. It needs to be tested, and you need to actually have something that becomes habitual. And if you're just eating and drinking whenever you feel like it because you're riding on a nice 6-hour ride with your mates, that's not training. That's not actually preparation for this thing, which is a more emotional race than any other race in the world, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I used to train with Pete Reed or with my brother Tony. Those were my 2 training partners, and I wouldn't go out with both. It was either one or the other. And I mean, Pete and I would go on 7-hour rides, but we didn't talk. We rode 10 meters apart, and just traded the lead, and it was just to basically practice. And the same thing with Tony and I. It was like we didn't have to talk. It was halftime. We had music on. It was just going out and getting the miles in, and then. It got to the point where I was on my own. I'd go 7 hours by myself, and it is that mental. I've said that a lot of the top guys train similar, and it comes down to nutrition and your mental capacity. And so for the most part, what you're training out there is your head more than anything, and your toughness. And it's hard for me to see that when you are going out with your mates.
Yeah. Do you think any final question, I guess? Do you feel like there's any lessons from the way that the pros set up their season, either positive or negative lessons that you can draw from pros for age groupers to sort of apply to their own racing?
Well, actually, the good thing that age groupers have is that they have to sign up so early to get into like an Ironman event. I mean, so they can really set up their season a year in advance, which means they can set up their training program and any obligations well in advance. And I think that's a huge benefit. I mean, if you know that, you're signed up for this Ironman, you can set your winter schedule and everything and build your base and build a proper season. I think it's a lot of pros just over race. They're chasing that dollar, or they're chasing the qualification points. And the age groupers don't have to do that. They can pick they can do more traditional and pick early season key race and a late season key race and really set up 2 peaks in a year, which I think is the ideal way to do something. And, I got to the point where I kind of envied the age groupers, how they could really, set up their season that way. You see so many pros like sign up for every race in the book and just cancel as they go along. And, I think the age groupers have an advantage there where they can set their schedule and stick to it, stay healthy that way.
Yeah, and not look to cram every race in the book, especially if they're an Ironman athlete, and especially if they're an Ironman athlete trying to qualify or trying to excel, trying to podium, whatever it might be. It has to be sort of more strategic and placed out. Well, I think that's great. I really appreciate you joining me, and it's insightful. I guess the last question: any predictions or thoughts on what is going to be an absolute crazy war this weekend in Austria?
God, it'd be hard to go against, like Gomez showing up there with Jan, and that's kind of the showdown I think everybody's expecting. And those guys have no weakness, so it'll be interesting to see if anybody else can kind of hang with them. And really, I think it's going to be an honest course, which is nice. It'll be fun to watch. It's just like last year. I think it was a good race. I'm excited. I'm excited to see the first European 70.3 World Championships. I think that's really exciting and bodes well for the sport. Austria is an amazing country. It was always my favorite to visit, so I'm jealous it's there.
It's tremendous and terrific for the sport and fantastic, and I think it's going to be a unique race and a different race, and I won't give my predictions because I've got both male and female pros in there. I will say that.
Yeah, women's race is going to be great too. It's I'm anxious to see where the people who are focusing on Kona are sitting with their their training and their racing, and then the 70.3 specialists. So it'll be a good one.
Who do you think on the women's race? I'll put you on the hot seat a little bit.
You know, I'm never good at predictions. You know, I pulled off a singer with Van Leert a couple years ago, but I don't follow the women's as much, just because I don't work with any of them really. But I'll be paying attention this weekend, so I'm anxious to see it.
Should be a fun race. So, well, thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate it, and we'll obviously see each other in Hawaii.
All right, take care.
Cheers, man. Take care.